Today we're talking about the only thing that matters in business, retention. Most entrepreneurs think growth is about marketing and sales, but it's not. The real secret is building a product or service that people never churn out of. If you have that, you don't need marketing, you don't need sales. You just win by default. I've spent the last 5 years in Silicon Valley solving this exact problem across a variety of products, including $1 million product sold to Google. And what I've found is there's a repeatable framework that converts one-time buyers into customers for life. It's neuroscience, it's predictable, and nobody's talking about it. And big tech companies have been exploiting this playbook for decades. So in this video, I'm exposing the whole thing. And this works whether you're selling services, info products, or software. In fact, I've used it to help business owners outside of tech hit six-figure profit months with minimal effort. So let's dive in. To start, we need to understand why retention matters and how it works from first principles. The first thing you need to understand is if you crack product, you grow by default and win. Not marketing, not sales, product. And yes, if you're selling a service, your service is the product. But product is hard because the feedback loops are longer than in sales and marketing. In sales, you say a few words and get immediate feedback. In marketing, you push a button and get immediate feedback. In product, to get the same amount of feedback you'd get in, say, 1,000 sales calls, you'd have to live multiple lifetimes. Because first, you have to build the product, which takes time, and then you have to wait several months to see how what you built impacted long-term retention. I'm 6 years in and I've learned directly from product executives at companies like Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and I'm only just now starting to feel like I'm getting the hang of it. So here's the secret. Retention is about hardwired behaviors or habits. You can either try creating a new habit, which is hard, or leveraging an existing one, which is easy. In behavioral psychology and neuroscience, this is often depicted as trigger, an action, and a reward. The two most famous books on habit formation, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear, is all about this. Now, I'm an engineer and I like precise language that is as objective and measurable as possible to inform what to do. So I'll add some precision to this concept. The way I see it, there are 4 main variables to assess a given behavior. There's the trigger, the task, the reward, and feedback loop length. Each of these variables has its own unique set of properties that determine how sticky a given habit or behavior is. Triggers can be either organic or manufactured, and the frequency of that trigger is also important. For tasks, every task has a given activation energy threshold that needs to be crossed in order for an action to occur. This is borrowing from decades of research pioneered by a Stanford University behavioral scientist that I've mentioned in a previous video. If you're interested in diving deeper into that concept, check this video out. But the quick summary is what I call an activation energy threshold is determined by the motivation someone has to complete a given task and the ability or how hard that task is to do. So you want to make sure that for any task or action that someone is highly motivated and that it's as easy as possible for them to do. For the reward variable, it's either a big or small dopamine release. The last variable is feedback loop length. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. It's the time between the task being completed or the action being taken and the reward received by completing that action. It's a feedback loop. The shorter the feedback loop, the better. Now, of the 4 variables, the 2 biggest to optimize around is trigger frequency and pain severity, or the motivation of a given task. We'll get into those later. But optimizing around these 4 variables is how you engineer stickiness. But you know what's even more powerful? Not having to engineer anything at all. If you pick products people already don't churn out of, you don't have to solve for churn. We'll cover how you do that on a different video. For now, knowing how to measure and improve retention is still important, which is what we'll cover next. All right, so now that we know why retention is important and how it works, let's cover how to tactically improve it. It starts by being able to measure it. The problem with retention is that you have no idea how it's going until someone leaves, at which point it's too late. This is known as a lagging indicator, and retention has the longest time horizon of any feedback loop in business, which makes it the hardest problem to solve. You can't just run an A/B test and immediately compare the results of a change like you can in sales and marketing. In sales and marketing, you have real-time feedback, making it easier to get good at. In addition, there's a much larger volume of data because it's easier to get thousands of clicks or jump on hundreds of calls than it is to get the same amount of people using your product. So you both have less data and longer feedback loops. In product, what you do today will have an impact 30, 60, and 90 days later. And in that time period, a bunch of stuff might have changed, which makes it hard to discern exactly what you did to contribute to retention. In short, being good at product and retention is rare. So to shortcut your skill acquisition here, the first thing thing you must understand is that retention is an output of many inputs. There are a bunch of different variables that can impact whether someone sticks around with your product for the long term. But the two most important are activation and engagement. Activation is getting people to develop a habit of using or getting value out of your product or service. Engagement kicks in after activation or after the habit is formed and is measured by core actions performed over time. If that sounds confusing, don't worry, I'll expand on these terms in a bit. But what you need to know right now is that if people are performing core actions regularly, in other words, they're engaged, it's likely they'll stick around. If they're not engaged, it's unlikely they'll stick around. And getting someone to develop a habit in the first place is the first step. So now that you know retention is an output of activation and engagement, let's double click into both. We'll start with activation. Activation is a concept that evolved in the tech industry about the exact moment at which your customer has successfully developed a habit of using or getting value out of your product or service. An easy way to think about it is like a hook. Just like the hook of a YouTube video, Instagram reel, or thread on X has an outsized impact on the retention of that piece of content, so too is the first few seconds, minutes, hours, and days of your product experience. The closer to the pay button, the bigger the impact. Now, as you can imagine, knowing the exact moment someone develops a habit or gets activated is hard. There could be a ton of different things that contribute to someone developing a habit with your product. A common way to find this moment is by performing a correlation analysis of successful and retained customers. In other words, you analyze the commonalities across your most successful customers that have stuck around the longest, including their traits and actions they took. Through this analysis, you might find that all of your most successful and retained customers share 3 very specific traits and did 3 very specific things. The reason the traits are important to map as well is because not everyone is a great fit for your product. So it's important to understand what your ideal customer looks like so that you can go out and find more of them. So that's the traits. The actions they took are self-explanatory. A famous example in the tech industry is Facebook's discovery of their 7 friends in 10 days activation metric. After performing a correlation analysis of their most retained users, the early team at Facebook identified that the people that stuck around on the platform the longest all added 7 friends within their first 10 days on the platform. And so what the team did with that insight is made it their North Star to repeat that across all users. They knew that all they had to do to increase the probability of someone sticking around for the long term was to get them to add 7 friends within their first 10 days. Once a user did that, they were locked in. So they optimized the entire experience to make sure that happened. The second someone signed up for Facebook, they were constantly nudged to add 7 friends at every turn. The onboarding, the emails, the newsfeed, everything. And this is exactly what you should be doing for your products and services. Analyze the data you have and talk to your most successful retained customers. Through those conversations, you want to identify common attributes and behavioral patterns and make it as easy as possible for others with those same attributes to replicate that exact path. And you can consider that path like a funnel. There are 3 key milestones in activation funnels. There's the setup moment, the aha moment, and the habit moment. The setup moment is when the customer has performed the actions needed to be ready to receive value. This is stuff like providing the basic information, assets, login credentials, etc. you need for your product or service to work for them. It's getting them set up. The aha moment is when the customer has first realized the core value of your product for the very first time. Thinking in terms of our habit loop, it's the first time they get that reward or dopamine hit. And feedback loop length is everything here. You want to close the gap between the action they take and the reward they receive. The closer to push button, immediate reward, the better. And this is often referred to as speed to value. You want this dialed. So if the core value of your product takes many weeks or months to realize, you can manufacture the quick reward by breaking down the longer path into many short milestones, each with a corresponding reward that creates a sense of progress and momentum. And if it's a service that requires no action from the customer, meaning you just do everything, you'd manufacture this dopamine hit with frequent updates of behind-the-scenes progress to also help them reach this aha moment quicker. The habit moment is when the customer has established the habit of using or getting value out of your product or service. This is usually expressed in terms of X actions in Y timeframe. In Facebook's case, it was 7 friends in 10 days. Once someone reaches this point, you can consider them activated. Tracking the number of activations you're getting per week is as important as tracking the number of sales you're getting per week. This metric is a leading indicator or a future predictor of retention 30, 60, 90 days down the line. And a critical lever you have to get as many customers to walk through this activation funnel in a reliable way is to dial in your onboarding. It's your opportunity to leverage the early excitement someone has with your product to walk them through this funnel in a structured way. If you try doing this later, the excitement will die off and it'll be much harder to get them activated. Now, once you've walked them through this funnel and have them activated, the new goal becomes to keep them engaged, which we'll talk about about next. All right, engagement kicks in after activation or after the habit is formed and is measured by core actions performed over time. If people are performing core actions regularly, in other words, if they are engaged, it's likely they'll stick around. If they are not performing core actions regularly, it's unlikely they'll stick around. Let's use Spotify, for example. The core action Spotify would use to determine whether or not you are engaged with the product is listens. If you hit the play button and listen for 5 seconds, you have engaged with their product and derived the core value that Spotify offers. If a customer is actively using or deriving value out of your product or service, they are engaged. So engagement is pretty cut and dry. But to measure engagement, you need to intentionally identify the core tasks or actions that form your habit loop and then track if they're being performed consistently over time. For Spotify, that task was the consumption of a song. In other words, a listen. And if you have an info product, your task might be the consumption of a module. In other words, a view. An important note here is that these tasks must result in a reward directly tied to the value your business is centered around. For example, if you're promising more leads, your customers should very easily be able to make the connection between this task they're completing and how that results in more leads. And a call out for those of you with communities. If you're promising an end result like get more leads, community engagement does not matter at all. This is because the action of posting in your community does not result in more leads. It is not a key action. It is not true engagement. But if the action of publishing a video does result in more leads, then publishing a video is a key action. Publishing a video is true engagement. So you'd want to track videos being published on their socials, not posts being submitted in your community. I'm sharing this because I see a lot of wasted efforts in incentivizing community engagement when the real way to retain people in your community is by making sure they're getting exactly what they were promised. And the only way to ensure that they get what they were promised is by having them perform the key actions that will result in what they're paying you for. So if you're promising leads through video and no one's publishing videos consistently, you'd want to focus all of your efforts in figuring out how to get them to publish videos. I'd even go as far as telling your community members to spend less time posting in your community and more time publishing videos. Because if they publish videos, they get leads, which is what they actually want, and then retention solves itself. So that's one component of engagement, defining the core action. Tracking core actions will tell you if a customer is engaged or not. But engagement isn't a binary yes or no. It's a spectrum. It's not whether or not someone is engaged, it's how engaged are they? Because someone that is quote unquote engaged might still be at risk of churning. So in order to measure the depth of that engagement, you also need to track frequency and intensity. Frequency is how many sessions someone has in returning to your product or service to perform the defined core action at least once. Intensity is how many times they perform the defined core action within each session. Going back to the Spotify example, if the defined core action is a listen and we're analyzing weekly engagement, frequency would be the number of times or sessions where at least one song was listened to that week. Intensity would be the average number of songs listened to within each session. Now, previously, I mentioned that of the 4 habit loop variables, trigger frequency is one of the most impactful. This is because the more frequent and naturally occurring the trigger, the deeper the engagement. We'll illustrate this with Spotify. One of the problems Spotify solves is boredom. When you're bored, you'll listen to a song to be entertained. And people get bored a lot, which will organically trigger them to reach for their phone and open the Spotify app. And I placed an emphasis on organically because other products like Duolingo attempt to manufacture this trigger by sending you a push notification. It's called a push notification because they are pushing you rather than letting the organic nature of the problem pull you in. Manufactured triggers are much less powerful than organic triggers. You just end up annoying people and getting ignored. So Spotify has a strong organic trigger baked right in. The problem is that TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and thousands of other products are also trying to solve that same boredom problem. But Spotify has 2 unfair advantages. The first is that listening is easier than watching. There are way more opportunities to listen to things, which only requires your ears, than there are to watch things, which requires both your eyes and your ears. Going back to our 4 variables, this is a property of the task variable. The ability to complete the task of listening is easier than it is to complete the task of watching. But the real secret sauce is that on top of the internal trigger, which is the boredom, meaning internally in your mind, you just get bored and reach for your phone, there are also many external triggers. When you go to the gym, when you're commuting, when you're working and want to focus with ambient sounds, these are all external triggers in that the environment around you reminds you to or triggers you to perform the core action. So the nature of of the trigger you're building around has an outsized impact on engagement and, as a byproduct, retention. But engagement looks different depending on the nature of your product, which is what we'll dive into next. All right, let's dive into finite journeys versus infinite loops. Your product will fall into one of two categories: a finite journey or an infinite loop. An infinite loop is the habit loop we've been talking about this whole time. If there's a recurring problem or pain point that can be repeatedly solved with an action that has a repeatable reward, there's a habit loop or an infinite loop. Optimizing for each of the four variables in the infinite loop will keep someone retained for life. In contrast, a finite journey is when there is a clear graduation point at which your product has delivered its end promise and the customer no longer needs your product or service. This is like a 4-year degree. The whole time you're building up to a graduation point, and once you hit it, you never return. For example, at my last company, we helped people get jobs in tech. The second they landed a job, they no longer needed us. It didn't matter what we did, it was guaranteed churn. So if your product naturally lends itself to a finite journey, you have to understand that you have guaranteed churn baked in. And this is fine. This is a completely viable business model. I just wanted to make this call out because I constantly see business owners trying to go for the highly coveted monthly recurring revenue only to be met with disappointment. So if you do have a finite journey, you have two levers to pull. The first is to adjust your pricing accordingly. Don't charge at monthly recurring price points when churn is guaranteed. Just make the calculation for when churn would naturally happen, cap the journey to that length of time, and collect cash upfront or throughout that specified period. The key is to not expect to collect cash forever and to not put yourself in a position where you create a ton of value but fail to capture it because people leave before you get a chance to charge them for it. The second lever you have is path extension. The only way to retain people post-graduation point is by extending the journey in the most natural and logical way. There are two ways to extend the journey: problem expansion and category expansion. Problem expansion is when the graduation point opens a new set of problems. For example, if you help people get leads, once they get leads, the new problem becomes closing those leads, then fulfilling for those leads. So that's problem expansion. Category expansion would be expanding from getting leads solely through short-form videos on Instagram Reels to long-form videos on YouTube. The problem remains the same. The category expands from just short-form video to video in general. Regardless, there are many ways to extend and mimic the infinite journey. But the problem with extending the journey is that as a byproduct, your product gets more generalized, loses potency, and increases in complexity. The less focused your product is, the harder it is to get in front of the right people, convert them, and fulfill for them. Additionally, your attention, energy, resources all get spread thin across a larger problem scope, making you worse at every piece. And your only solution at that point would be to throw bodies at it and hire a larger team, which comes with its own set of problems. So to emphasize, expanding the problem scope doesn't make it just twice or 10 times as hard. It's like making it 1,000 times as hard. And I say this because most entrepreneurs don't understand how hard it is to just do one thing well, let alone two. So as obvious as it might feel to extend your finite journey into a longer one, the approach I recommend is to go narrower and identify a sub-step within your finite journey that has the potential of becoming an infinite loop. This is exactly what Callaway and I identified within Short-Form Academy. One of the sub-steps to generating millions of views, which is what the Academy helps business owners do, is writing scripts. And business owners need to write scripts all the time, making it an infinite loop. And better yet, it's a narrow enough problem that can be precisely defined step by step, which means it can be automated by code and AI. And that's exactly what Sandcastles aims to do. It's Callaway's brain embedded into a product that can be used in an infinite loop. So even if a business owner graduates out of the academy, they'll keep using Sandcastles. And eventually the profit of this hands-off infinite loop software will outgrow the profit of a hands-on finite journey academy. And that's freedom unlocked. That's how powerful narrowing your problem set and identifying infinite loops are. And if you want help for this for your business, I have a free community for 6-figure business owners where we dive deep on this stuff. So check out the link in the description. Now, when you've successfully anchored around an infinite loop, how do you go about measuring and improving retention so that you can keep customers for life? Well, that's next. So to improve anything, you need to be able to measure it. So if you're not tracking anything, that's where you should start. You want to make sure your activation funnel, the setup, aha, and habit moments, as well as your engagement metrics, the core action, the frequency, and the intensity of it, are all properly being identified and tracked. I recommend having what is known as an event dictionary to document all events or actions you're tracking so that you have a clear understanding of how you're measuring your product's performance. The tech industry uses dedicated analytics tools like Amplitude, Mixpanel, and PostHog that track every click and scroll. This is the benefit of building software. You can get very precise with what you measure. But if you're primarily running your business with third-party tools, you might not have that. Some tools might provide granular granular analytics, which is great. But for the most part, what I've found is that they don't provide you with the right analytics. For example, if you're running your business on community platforms like School or Circle, they'll give you high-level engagement metrics like whether someone logged in or posted, but they don't give you granular details into the actual important metrics like onboarding step completion, course module completion, core actions taken, etc., that are critical to understand the health of your product. So to compensate, you'll want to track a lot of things manually, both inside and outside the core platform you're using. For example, for Short-Form Academy, we're tracking both how members are progressing through the trainings and completing milestones within the platform, as well as the videos they're publishing outside of the platform. But we don't own the social media platforms and don't have direct access to the data. So we track them manually, and we've had AI help us write some code that tracks some of this data in an automated way. Regardless, if you're not doing everything you can to collect the data that you need, you will not be able to systematically improve retention. You'd just be guessing, trying one thing one week, and not seeing results for months down the line. But when you do track them, you'll have leading indicators that will tell you where you need to focus. You can use whatever CRM you currently use to track data, or even a Google Sheet you update regularly. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it does need to be tracked. And if that sounds like a lot of work, welcome to business. Someone that is willing to collect that data will just outrun you. So beyond tracking actions, another tool you can use is to regularly survey for customer satisfaction. Satisfaction is another leading indicator that will tell you whether this customer is likely to churn in the future or not. And it gives you an immediate opportunity to prevent them from churning if they're unsatisfied for whatever reason. And a note here, businesses commonly use Net Promoter Scores or NPS for their surveys. Do not do this. You want to survey for customer satisfaction or CSAT, not NPS. The difference between the two is that NPS asks, on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend? Whereas CSAT directly asks, on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with our product? The reason NPS doesn't actually work is there may be a number of reasons why someone might not want to recommend you. Maybe they don't want anyone knowing that they needed your help to begin with. Or maybe you're so good they want to keep you a secret to keep their competitive advantage. The human mind is tugged at by all sorts of motivators, so it's better to reduce the noise and just ask for satisfaction directly. You could ask for both, but just know that NPS is more related to your referral efforts than it is to retention. And referrals are important, but you need to retain and satisfy your customers before you can ask for a referral, which is why we're focused on that right now. If you want me to dedicate a video on referrals, let me know in the comments. So to reiterate, CSAT over NPS. Now, when you get your CSAT results, count all the submissions that were 4s and 5s and divide that by the total number of submissions. The resulting percentage is your satisfaction score. Anything above 65% is generally considered good, and anything above 80% is generally considered exceptional. Personally, I like raising the bar and making above 75% good and above 85% for exceptional. Now, there are a bunch of other advanced retention charts and graphs you can use to diagnose the health of your product, but for now, focusing on the activation funnel, monitoring core actions, and regularly surveying for customer satisfaction will go a long way. If you want me to dive deeper on that in an upcoming video, also let me know in the comments. To close out, I'll do a rapid fire on what you can actually do to improve retention. All right, first, you want to focus on problems with frequent organic triggers. Daily is better than weekly, is better than monthly. And naturally occurring triggers are better than manufacturing them by sending emails and notifications to come back. This is why Spotify and social media apps are so sticky. Boredom happens multiple times a day, and Spotify doesn't need to push you. You just naturally come back. Second, optimize for speed to value. The longer it takes for someone to experience the core benefit, the less likely they are to stick around. You want to collapse the distance between first use and aha moment as much as possible. Third, create structured onboarding that guides users to the habit moment as efficiently as possible. Facebook's 7 friends in 10 days is the blueprint. Speak to your customers and map out what actions correlate with long-term retention, then design your onboarding to ensure those actions happen. The first week is make or break for habit formation. Fourth, for communities and services, focus on driving actual value-creating behaviors, not just vanity engagement. Again, if you promise more leads from video, track videos published, not community posts. Align your success metrics with the actual outcome your customers are paying you for. Everything else is a distraction. Fifth, for finite journeys, identify substeps that could become infinite loops. Instead of expanding out, narrow in. With AI, you could build software around this loop in a weekend without knowing how to code. And you might just find that you've been sitting on $1 billion opportunity. Sixth, track weekly activation rates religiously. This is your leading indicator for retention 30, 60, 90 days down the line. If your activation rate drops, your retention in the future will drop. If it increases, your retention will increase. It's the closest thing to a crystal ball you'll get. And finally, create a customer health score combining usage and satisfaction. Combine your engagement metrics with CSAT surveys to identify at-risk customers before they churn. This allows for early intervention instead of reactive damage control. The best retention strategy is prevention, not convincing them to come back. And remember, product and retention is the ultimate growth lever for your business. If your product is sticky enough, word of mouth becomes inevitable and you win by default. If it's not, no amount of marketing or sales will save you. And the stakes are high because the feedback loops are long, which is why most people avoid tackling retention. But now you have the framework to crack it. All right, that's it for this one. If you've made it this far, thanks for tuning in. This is my 4th video ever and I'm just getting started. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I have an exclusive free community of 6-figure entrepreneurs and free resources that you can check out in the description. And let me know what you'd like to see more of in the comments. See you on the next one. Peace.